High Commander Senna Valerix of the Vanari Empire stood aboard the bridge of the Eternal Symmetry, her iridescent scales reflecting the holographic display of Earth's combined defense fleet. After 10,000 years of perfect victories, the Vanari had developed military precision into an art form. Every ship movement, every tactical decision, followed patterns refined across centuries of combat simulations. But something was wrong. High Commander, her tactical officer, First Blade Kex, called out. His crystalline interface implants pulsed with agitation. The humans are. They're not responding according to any known combat doctrine. Senna's secondary hearts quickened as she watched the scene unfold. The human vessels moved in ways that violated every principle of space combat the Vanari had perfected. Some ships powered down completely, appearing disabled, only to surge back to life at seemingly random intervals. Others executed wild spiraling maneuvers that should have torn their primitive hulls apart. "Impossible," she whispered. "Run a pattern analysis." "I've tried 17 times, High Commander." "Their movements are..." Kex's voice cracked with professional dismay. "Chaotic. There is no discernible pattern." The Vanari fleet had arrived in Sol system expecting another routine integration. Their perfect geometric formation, 100 ships arranged in the spiral of dominance, had cowed countless civilizations into immediate surrender. This display of mathematical superiority was meant to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Instead, the humans seemed to be mocking them. A small human vessel suddenly appeared from behind Earth's moon, its engines cold, riding the gravitational wake like a primitive sailing vessel. By all logic, its trajectory should have been predictable. Yet it somehow managed to slip through a gap in the Vanari formation that shouldn't have existed. "How did they calculate that approach vector?" Senna demanded. "Our formations are mathematically perfect." "They didn't calculate it, High Commander," her science officer replied, checking readings. "As far as we can tell, they're improvising. Each ship appears to be operating independently, responding to opportunities as they arise." The concept of military improvisation was so foreign to Vanari doctrine that Senna's translator struggled to convey the meaning. Their entire civilization was built on the principle that perfect order led to perfect victory. The idea of deliberately introducing chaos into combat was more than heretical. It was incomprehensible. "Launch the drone network," Senna ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to understand what we're seeing." The Vanari released thousands of sensor drones, their crystalline bodies forming a perfect observation grid around the human fleet. For a moment, Senna felt control returning. Now they would have total information awareness of every human ship's position and vector. That's when the humans released their own drones. But instead of forming an organized countergrid, the human machines scattered like startled animals, spraying clouds of metallic chaff and electromagnetic noise in seemingly random patterns. The careful geometry of the Vanari sensor network collapsed into confusion. "High Commander," Kex's voice had risen an octave. "They're using our own sensor echoes against us. The chaff clouds are creating false returns that follow our own search patterns. They're turning our precision against us." Senna felt her scales ripple with disbelief. The humans weren't just refusing to follow proper military doctrine. They were weaponizing their own chaos. Each apparently random movement created new tactical possibilities that the Vanari combat computers couldn't predict. A human voice crackled across the command channel, breaking all proper first contact protocols. "Vanari Fleet, this is Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Force. We notice you're having some trouble with your sensor grid. Would you like to discuss terms?" The casual confidence in the human's voice sent a shiver down Senna's spine. She had led 1,000 battles across 5 galaxies and never once encountered a species that treated combat like this. "Open a channel," she commanded, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Admiral Chen, your tactics are unprecedented. You cannot hope to defeat the Vanari Empire with such primitive methods." "Primitive?" The human's laugh carried clearly across the channel. "High Commander, We passed primitive, the moment we realized that perfect order is just another kind of weakness. Your empire has spent 10,000 years learning to fight wars like mathematics. We spent that time learning to fight like humans. As if to emphasize the point, 3 human destroyers suddenly executed a maneuver that looked like a catastrophic collision course. The Vanari fleet automatically adjusted to exploit what their combat computers identified as a critical error. But at the last moment, the human ships used their combined momentum to slingshot a 4th, previously undetected vessel directly through the Vanari formation's strongest point. Impossible, Keck shouted. They're violating 7 different laws of tactical optimization. No, Senna replied, a dawning realization sending her hearts into arrhythmia. They're ignoring them completely. She watched as the human fleet continued to move like a swarm of insects, each ship responding to opportunities the Vanari computers couldn't even detect until it was too late. And somehow, it's working. For the first time in 10,000 years of Vanari military history, a high commander gave an order that wasn't supported by combat simulations. All ships, withdraw to safe distance. We need to reconsider our approach. As the Vanari fleet reformed at the edge of the solar system, Senna stared at the tactical display, watching the human ships return to their defensive positions. Each movement still seemed random, unpredictable, practically offensive to her military sensibilities. But she couldn't deny the evidence before her. The humans had taken one look at the most perfect military doctrine in the galaxy, and rather than trying to match it, they had chosen to become its antithesis. Their strength lay not in perfection, but in their embrace of imperfection. Send a message to the Imperial Council, she commanded. The humans, they're not like the others. We're going to need a new approach. Everything we know about warfare may need to be reconsidered. As she watched her perfect formation retreat from the chaos of the human fleet, Senna Valerix, High Commander of the Vanari Empire, felt something she had never experienced in all her centuries of service: doubt. The Imperial archives aboard the Vanari command ship, Eternal Symmetry, hummed with crystalline energy as it processed combat data from the Earth encounter. High Commander Senna Valerix watched the holographic simulations with growing frustration, her scales shifting from their usual pearl white to a troubled azure. Play it again, she commanded. Sector 4, Time Index 2300. The simulation showed a human corvette executing what should have been a suicidal maneuver, diving between 2 Vanari cruisers. According to 10,000 years of combat doctrine, the ship should have been instantly destroyed by overlapping fields of fire. Instead, the human vessel had somehow turned the cruiser's perfect positioning against them, using their own synchronized weapon patterns to create a corridor of safety. Impossible, First Blade Kex muttered, his interface implants pulsing rapidly. They couldn't have calculated that path. The variables were too complex. They didn't calculate it, Second Blade Naira said, her younger voice carrying an unsettling note of fascination. Watch the human pilot's neural patterns. She highlighted a stream of data. See these spikes. They're not running calculations. They're reacting. Their neural activity suggests intuitive decision-making, not computational analysis. Senna felt her primary heart skip a beat. You're saying they're guessing? Educated guessing, based on experience and instinct, Naira corrected. Their ships are designed to be incredibly responsive to pilot input. While our crews execute perfect pre-planned maneuvers, their pilots are actively adapting to the changing battlefield. The concept was so alien that Senna had to sit down. The Vanari had spent millennia perfecting the art of predictive combat. Every maneuver was planned 12 steps ahead, every formation optimized through millions of simulations. The idea of trusting combat decisions to individual intuition was heretical, Kex said, voicing her thoughts. It violates every principle of modern warfare. And yet, Senna replied, we're the ones who retreated. The archives hummed as new data streamed in from scout drones observing Earth's defense fleet. The humans were conducting exercises, but unlike any military drills the Vanari had ever seen. Each session appeared to be unique, with ships practicing responses to random, unexpected scenarios. They're deliberately introducing chaos into their training, Naira observed. Look, they're running simulations where their own ships behave erratically, forcing commanders to adapt to unpredictable situations. Senna watched as a human destroyer suddenly cut power, drifting dead in space. The other human ships immediately adjusted their formation, not into any recognizable pattern, but into positions that somehow covered their vulnerable companion, while maintaining maximum tactical flexibility. How do they coordinate without a unified doctrine? Kex demanded. How do they maintain tactical coherence without perfect geometric formations? They don't, Naira said softly. At least, not in the way we understand it. Their coherence emerges from shared principles and objectives, not from rigid protocols. Each ship commander has the freedom to interpret and adapt those principles as the situation demands. A message flashed across Senna's neural interface. The Imperial Council was demanding an explanation for her retreat. How could she explain that the most powerful military force in known space had been forced to withdraw because the enemy's tactics made too little sense? Prepare a full analysis for the Council, she ordered. Focus on the humans' adaptive capabilities and she struggled with the concept, their intentional use of tactical entropy. High Commander, a sensor operator called out suddenly. We're detecting increased activity in the human fleet. They're moving. The tactical display showed Earth's ships advancing toward the Vanari position, but not in any formation the Empire's vast military archives recognized. Some ships moved in aggressive straight lines while others took seemingly random curved paths. A few appeared to be drifting off course entirely. Battle stations, Senna commanded, her scales rippling with determination. This time, we'll be ready for their chaos. But as the human fleet approached, something even stranger happened. The random movements began to coalesce, not into any recognized formation, but into what appeared to be a deliberate anti-pattern. Wherever the Vanari's combat computers predicted a tactical vulnerability, human ships would appear in precisely the wrong position to exploit it, forcing the computers to recalculate, only to have the humans shift again. They're learning, Naira whispered, not just adapting to our tactics, but actively exploiting our predictability. All ships, execute pattern Sigma 7, Senna ordered, selecting a combat formation so complex it had taken the Imperial archives 3 centuries to optimize. The Vanari fleet moved with mathematical precision, each ship finding its predicted position down to the meter. It was a display of coordination that had broken the will of countless enemies. The humans responded by doing exactly what the combat computers said they couldn't, everything at once. Ships that should have advanced retreated. Ships that should have retreated charged forward. Vessels that appeared crippled suddenly revealed hidden weapon systems, while seemingly aggressive attackers turned out to be sensor ghosts created by expertly scattered debris. Multiple impacts. Kex shouted as human weapons fire somehow found gaps in their perfect formation. They're using our own tactical algorithms to predict where we'll be. Senna watched in horror as her fleet's formation began to disintegrate. The humans hadn't just learned to counter Vanari tactics, they had learned to weaponize their own chaos against the Empire's perfect order. Fall back, she commanded, her voice heavy with the weight of impossible defeat. Emergency temporal shift. Get us out of here. As the Vanari fleet retreated for the second time, Senna stared at the tactical display, watching the human ships return to their seemingly random patrol patterns. In all her centuries of service, she had never imagined that perfection could be defeated by its opposite. Send word to the Imperial Council, she said quietly. The humans, they're not just refusing to follow the rules of warfare, they're rewriting them. And we. Her scales shifted to the deep blue of troubled realization. We don't know how to read their new book. The Imperial Council chamber aboard the Vanari capital ship, Divine Symmetry, had never witnessed disorder in its 1,000-year history. Until today, raised voices echoed off the crystalline walls as 5,000 years of military doctrine, crumbled in the face of humanity's impossible victories. 2 defeats. High General Corax's scales had turned almost black with rage. 2 defeats by primitives who haven't even mastered temporal mechanics. This is unprecedented. High Commander Senna Velarix stood at the center of the chamber, her own scales maintaining their professional pearl white through sheer force of will. The tactical recordings from both encounters with the human fleet played in the air around her, a dance of chaos that had humbled the Empire's most perfect formations. "The humans represent something we've never encountered," she said, her voice steady. "Their tactical doctrine isn't merely different from ours, it's its antithesis. Where we seek perfect order, they embrace controlled chaos. Where we optimize, they improvise. Where we calculate, they intuit." "Impossible," another council member shouted. "No species can achieve space travel without developing proper military doctrine. The mathematics of combat evolution are universal." "Are they?" Second Blade Naira stepped forward, her youth marking her as barely a century old. She'd been granted unprecedented permission to address the council after her insights into human combat psychology. "We assumed military doctrine must evolve toward perfect order because that's what we observed in every species we encountered. But what if that's not the only path?" The chamber's crystalline walls pulsed with agitation as Naira interfaced with the tactical display. The chaotic movements of human ships suddenly transformed into patterns, not the perfect geometric formations of Vanari doctrine, but something else, something organic. "Look at how they move," Naira continued. "Like a school of fish evading predators, like birds flocking through complex wind patterns. They've developed their combat doctrine not from mathematical perfection, but from observing natural systems that evolved to handle chaos and uncertainty." "That's absurd," Corax scoffed. "Nature is inefficient, imperfect." "Nature," Senna countered, "has survived for billions of years. Our perfect doctrine is only 10,000 years old. Perhaps," she hesitated, knowing her next words bordered on heresy, "perhaps we're the ones working from an incomplete dataset." The tactical display shifted to show a human destroyer executing what the Vanari had dubbed an impossible maneuver. A complex spiral that violated 6 different laws of combat optimization, but had somehow resulted in the destruction of 3 Vanari cruisers. "Their pilots train for chaos," Naira explained. "Each ship commander is taught to think independently, to trust their instincts, to see patterns in randomness that our computers can't predict. They don't just accept chaos, they weaponize it. And how do you suggest we counter this heresy?" Corax demanded. "That's just it," Senna replied. "Every counter we devise based on our doctrine fails because our responses are predictable. The humans have learned to read our patterns faster than our computers can read their chaos." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vanari Empire had spent millennia perfecting the art of predictable warfare, only to encounter a species that thrived on being unpredictable. "There's more," Naira added, her voice quiet but clear. "Analysis of their communications suggests each human ship commander has significant tactical autonomy. They can make combat decisions without consulting their command structure. Their entire fleet can adapt to new situations faster than our optimization algorithms can compute a single solution." "Madness," a council member whispered. "How can they coordinate without perfect command synchronization?" "They coordinate through shared principles rather than shared algorithms," Senna explained. "Each commander understands their objective and can improvise their own path to achieving it. It's like they're playing a different game entirely." The tactical display showed a particularly devastating moment from their last encounter, a human frigate appearing to suffer catastrophic engine failure, drawing Vanari ships into a perfect firing position, only to reveal it was a trap. The failing engine had been precisely calibrated to create a sensor blind spot that hid 3 other human vessels. "They're not just ignoring our doctrine," Senna continued. "They're using our own perfection against us. Every pattern we create becomes a vulnerability they can exploit. Every optimized formation becomes a predictable target." High General Corax's scales had shifted from black rage to a troubled gray. Are you suggesting we abandon 5,000 years of proven military doctrine? No, Senna replied. I'm suggesting something far more difficult. We need to learn from them. We need to understand how they think. And most challenging of all, we need to learn how to think like them. The chamber erupted in protests, but Senna noticed something interesting. The younger council members, those who had actually studied the human combat footage, were silent. Their scales showed not anger, but fascination. We face a choice, she continued, raising her voice above the chaos. We can cling to our doctrine of perfect order and continue to be defeated by those who master chaos. Or we can do something unprecedented in Vanari history. We can adapt. The crystalline walls of the chamber pulsed with the emotional turmoil of its occupants. 5,000 years of military certainty were being challenged by a species that seemed to defy the very laws of tactical evolution. And if we refuse to adapt? Corax asked, his voice heavy with the weight of tradition. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the EDF Nightingale, studying the holographic display of Vanari space. After 6 months of defensive victories, humanity was ready to take the fight to the enemy. But not in the way the Vanari might expect. Status of Operation Thunderstorm, she asked, watching as hundreds of human ships moved through their final preparations. All task forces report ready, Captain Rodriguez replied. Though I still think the Vanari will see through our deliberate mistakes. Chen smiled. That's exactly what we're counting on. They can't help themselves. Pattern recognition is hardwired into their military thinking. Show them what they expect to see, and they'll follow those expectations right into our trap. The human fleet had spent months studying how the Vanari processed battlefield information. Their obsession with perfect geometric formations wasn't just tactical doctrine, it was cultural. They literally couldn't conceive of military action that didn't follow mathematical principles. Task Force Chaos, you have authorization to proceed, Chen commanded. Remember, make it look sloppy. Make it look human. Across 3 star systems, human ships began their advance into Vanari space. But unlike their defensive battles, these formations appeared to follow recognizable patterns. To Vanari observers, it would look like humanity was finally attempting to adopt proper military doctrine and failing badly at it. Aboard the Divine Symmetry, High Commander Senna Valerix watched the human advance with growing unease. Her scales shifted between white and gray as she struggled to process what she was seeing. They're attempting to implement standard combat formations, First Blade Kex reported, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Poorly. Too poorly, Second Blade Nera countered, her younger perspective once again cutting through conventional wisdom. Look at these errors. They're too consistent, too calculated. Senna felt her primary heart skip a beat as she realized the truth. It's a trap. They're not trying to copy our doctrine. They're weaponizing our expectations against us. But the revelation came too late. The Vanari fleet had already begun moving to exploit the humans' apparent tactical mistakes, their combat computers automatically calculating optimal attack vectors based on standard response patterns. That's when the trap was sprung. The seemingly disorganized human formations suddenly transformed. Ships that appeared to be struggling with basic maneuvers executed perfect pivot turns. Vessels that were accidentally out of position revealed themselves to be precisely where they needed to be. What looked like failed attempts at geometric formations became organic, flowing attack patterns that the Vanari computers couldn't predict. Multiple contacts. Kex shouted as human ships seemed to materialize from nowhere. They've been using their mistakes to mask their real movements. Chen watched from the Nightingale as the battle unfolded exactly as planned. Humanity didn't spend 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. She transmitted on an open channel to the Vanari fleet. We spent it perfecting the art of deception, of adaptation, of turning chaos itself into a weapon. Senna watched in horrified fascination as her fleet's perfect formations crumbled under the human assault. Every attempt to establish geometric order was met with precisely calculated disorder. Every predictable response was countered before it could be executed. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was useless. The humans had seeded the designated fallback points with gravitic minds, once again predicting how the Vanari would respond to tactical pressure. How? Kex demanded as another cruiser squadron fell to the human attack. How can they predict us so accurately while remaining so unpredictable themselves? Because we taught them how we think, Naira replied quietly. While we were trying to understand their chaos, they were learning to weaponize our order. The battle continued for 6 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The humans hadn't just learned to counter Vanari tactics, they had learned to exploit them. Every perfect formation became a perfect target. Every optimized response became an opportunity for ambush. In the end, Senna had to give the order she never thought she'd utter. All ships, random escape vectors. Disregard optimal patterns. Just get out alive. As the remnants of her fleet fled in genuine disorder, Senna received one final transmission from Admiral Chen. Your empire spent millennia learning to fight wars like a perfectly programmed machine. Humanity spent that time learning to fight like humans. We learned to adapt, to improvise, to embrace chaos as a tactical asset. And now we've learned to use your perfect order against you. The question is, what will you learn from this? Senna watched her surviving ships scatter across space, for the first time in Vanari history abandoning their precise formations in favor of unpredictable escape vectors. The few vessels that survived were the ones whose commanders managed to override their training and embrace disorder. "Send word to the Imperial Council," she commanded, her scales shifting to a deep blue of profound realization. Tell them we've been perfecting the wrong things. The humans haven't been ignoring the laws of combat evolution. They've discovered laws we never knew existed." As her flagship limped home, Senna found herself doing something no Vanari commander had done in 5,000 years. She began questioning everything she thought she knew about the art of war. The space above New Terra blazed with the light of 1,000 suns as the combined human-Vanari fleet faced its greatest challenge. The Nexus Horde, a species that had perfected the art of hive-mind warfare, had emerged from deep space with technologies that made both human chaos and Vanari precision seem primitive by comparison. High Commander Senna Valeric stood on the bridge of the Eternal Symmetry, but the ship no longer flew in perfect formation. Instead, it moved in concert with human vessels in patterns that would have been considered heretical just 1 year ago. Her scales shifted through colors that had no name in the Vanari language as she watched the impossible become routine. "Status of the human squadrons?" she asked, her voice carrying none of the disdain it once held for humanity's primitive tactics. "Admiral Chen's forces are successfully disrupting the Horde's neural network," Second Blade Naira reported. "Their chaotic attack patterns are creating feedback loops in the enemy's hive-mind coordination. And our precision strikes executing exactly as calculated, High Commander. The humans' disorder is hurting the enemy exactly where our mathematical models predicted. A year ago, such a combination would have been unthinkable. The Vanari, masters of perfect order, fighting alongside humans, champions of tactical chaos. But their defeat at human hands had taught the Empire something profound. True evolution came not from perfecting a single approach, but from embracing seemingly contradictory strengths." Admiral Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the command channel. "Senna, their hive mind is adapting to our chaos patterns. Time to show them what happens when order and disorder dance together." Acknowledged Sarah. The use of first names would have been another heresy once. Now it was a symbol of how far both species had come. "All Vanari ships, execute Protocol Infinity." The Vanari fleet's formation shifted, not into their traditional geometric patterns, but into something new. A hybrid form that looked chaotic at first glance, but contained deep mathematical principles that emerged and dissolved like waves on an ocean. Meanwhile, The human ships appeared to scatter randomly, only to have their seemingly disorganized movements reveal complex underlying patterns. "They're trying to adapt," Naira reported as the Horde ships attempted to counter the combined assault. "Their hive mind can't process our actions. They can't predict if we'll respond with precision or chaos." "That's because we'll do both," Chen transmitted. "And neither, and everything in between." The battle unfolded like a dance choreographed by a mad genius. Human ships would create apparent chaos, driving the Horde into positions where Vanari precision could strike with devastating effect. Vanari formations would then fragment in calculated ways, creating opportunities for human improvisation to exploit. "Their neural network is overloading," Naira announced with barely contained excitement. "They can't adapt to something that follows both all the rules and no rules simultaneously." Senna watched as the combined fleet executed maneuvers that defied traditional military doctrine, while somehow also perfecting it. The Vanari had learned to inject controlled chaos into their perfect formations, while the humans had learned to weave subtle patterns into their apparent disorder. The result was something entirely new, a form of warfare that transcended both species' original approaches. "Look at how they break apart," Chen observed as the Horde's formation began to crumble. "They expected either order or chaos. We're giving them quantum warfare, every possibility existing simultaneously until the moment of engagement." The battle's outcome was never in doubt after that. The Horde's hive mind, designed to counter either mathematical precision or random chaos, couldn't handle an enemy that employed both with equal mastery. Their retreat, when it came, was as much philosophical as tactical. In the aftermath, as human and Vanari ships regrouped in formations that would have given traditional commanders aneurysms, Senna reflected on how far they'd come. "We thought we had perfected warfare," she transmitted to Chen. "We thought there was nothing left to learn." "That was your first mistake," Chen replied with the casual wisdom that had once infuriated Vanari commanders. "Perfection isn't a destination, it's a journey. The moment you think you've achieved it is the moment you stop evolving." Senna's scales shifted to a new color, one that the Vanari had recently added to their spectrum. They called it human blue, the color of beautiful uncertainty. "The Imperial Council has proposed something unprecedented," she said. "A permanent exchange program. Your chaos theorists working with our mathematical strategists. Your intuitive commanders training alongside our analytical officers, teaching each other to see war through new eyes." Chen agreed. "Your people learning to embrace controlled chaos, ours learning to find the patterns in randomness. We'll create something entirely new," Naira added, her young voice carrying the excitement of discovery. "Not perfect order, not pure chaos, but a synthesis that transcends both." As Senna watched human and Vanari ships moving together in their new hybrid formations, she realized that this was true evolution, not the perfection of a single approach, but the courage to challenge every assumption, to learn from those who thought differently, to become something greater than either species could have achieved alone. Perhaps, she transmitted to both fleets, this is what perfection really looks like, not a fixed point of absolute order, but an endless dance between chaos and precision, each making the other stronger. The combined fleet moved through space in patterns that defied traditional analysis. Too ordered to be chaos, too chaotic to be perfect order. And in that contradiction, they had found something truly perfect. The ability to keep evolving, keep learning, keep discovering new ways to be wrong about what they thought was right. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter on this new form of warfare, this marriage of chaos and order that had turned ancient enemies into partners in evolution. And somewhere in the depths of space, other species would soon learn what happened when humanity's creative chaos joined forces with Vanari precision, not to perfect war, but to perfect the art of never stopping learning.